The 2000s was a strange time for both Disney and Nintendo. These two are often seen as equals in the faces of their respective industries, but despite their prior success, they just weren't doing as well when the new millennium started. Disney was being overshadowed by the New Kids on the Block, DreamWorks, and Pixar. Yes, Pixar is technically a part of Disney, but between the years of 2002 and 2006, the two were going through ownership disputes. And just like them, Nintendo was also being overshadowed, as the GameCube only sold around 20 million units, as the other new kid on the block, Microsoft's Xbox, was overshadowing them, though not by much, and the Sony PlayStation 2, which would become the world's best-selling video game console of all time, still to this day. Both weren't doing well, either financially or critically, as Disney would simply try to follow trends, trying to make their own Shrek or Rugrats the movie. Don't get me wrong, both still had some great stuff come out, but they would still underperform like films such as Treasure Planet or Atlantis for simply not being CGI, or most of the GameCube's lineup, as there's only so many copies you can sell on a platform that already wasn't doing well, and this was also the era where the mentality of colorful equal kitty was starting to sprout, but that's a discussion for another day. But there is one good thing that can come from failure, as when these kind of companies are struggling, that's when they're willing to try something new. They can't just rely on what used to work, because if they could, then they wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. The 2000s era of both Disney and Nintendo are often seen as some of their most experimental. I truly believe that it's because of this that Disney was willing to give Kingdom Hearts a chance, and if it was pitched today, I honestly think it would have been turned down. Nintendo was also making new takes on some of their beloved IPs that would still be remembered to this day, like Metroid Prime and Wind Waker. But there's a reason why I bring up both of these studios and their struggles during the early 2000s, and that's because they were both willing to try one thing that they never would have in any other era, and that's produce a mature horror project. Nintendo created Eternal Darkness, a survival horror game released early in the GameCube's life. But unfortunately I don't own a copy of that, so I can't talk about it just yet. But I do own a copy of Stay Alive, Disney's only slasher film, which ironically enough is themed around video games. Think about it, these two giants of their industries are underperforming as the New Kids on the Block were giving them a run for their money, so they took a massive risk by creating something that defies their family-friendly ways. But only one would become a cult classic, and the other is Stay Alive. A slasher film about a cursed video game of the same name. If you die in this game, you die in the real world in the exact same manner. A group of young adults get their hands on an early test build after the main character's brother mysteriously dies. Now before we begin, we must clarify. Of course you're not going to see Disney's logo on this film, but it is produced by them. The main studio behind this film is Hollywood Pictures. This studio was founded by Disney in 1989 to increase their output, and also to create more adult films without having their name directly attached to them and thus keeping their family-friendly image safe, similar to Nightmare Before Christmas and Touchstone, and how Cartoon Network would start Adult Swim so it could continue to make shows like Aqua Teen or The Brak Show. This means that The Sixth Sense, one of their films, is technically a Disney movie, but I guess so is Alien and Predator due to the Fox buyout, so it's not really that shocking anymore. But I digress. I gotta say, the DVD menu of this movie is probably one of the best I've seen. You can change the character on screen to one of the three protagonists, change their attire, and the weapon they're holding. But this isn't just for show. Click instructions and you'll be told to figure out the right combination of character, shirt, and weapon. Fail, and this'll happen. Each character has only one correct combination. For example, select Touch, give him the white and blue shirt, and make him hold the shotgun, and you'll be taken to a secret menu. That's actually really cool. That reminds me, I should totally do a video on DVD menus one day. There's a lot worth sharing. One last thing before we begin. Yes, I know it took a while with the history of this film, but this is kind of important. I got this recorded using my PlayStation 2. Because of that, the footage might look a little dark. It's an issue that comes from using a current TV or hookup. DVDs seem to be affected the most, so I'll try to adjust the contrast to make things more visible, so keep this in mind. Now let's finally talk about the film itself. Goddamn, I suck at intros. Our main character is Hutch, whose brother recently died. He inherits some of his belongings, including a strange video game he was beta testing called Stay Alive. Hutch and his friends decide to come together and try the game out. They find it as a survival horror game based on an old legend. Now the first problem of the film starts here. Our cast is fucking stupid. They ain't got no brain. The game doesn't work at first, but then they realize they have to read the prayer to Elizabeth out loud for the game to start. They think that this is some sort of advanced mechanic and voice integration, when none of them in the room are using a mic, so how does that even make sense? It's the logic of those creepypasta video game protagonists that see some obvious haunted shenanigans and either think, it's a glitch, or their curiosity got the better of them. You guys are talking to a fucking video game and don't think there's nothing wrong? None of you would survive Pikmin.wmv. Of course, their friend Miller dies in the game, as he would later die that night the exact same way. Only then do they realize that something paranormal is happening. After this, the film just plays it by the books. If you've seen any horror movie, you can probably guess where the plot is going to go, especially when the detective steps in. Gee, I wonder if he's going to be told that this video game is killing people, as of course he will believe them, or then he think that these kids are a death cult. Nah, they wouldn't do that. And that's one of the biggest weaknesses of the film. It's very standard for a horror movie of that time. That kind of makes it hard to talk about. You think that being themed around video games, that they would have taken some advantage of the medium. Well, I will say the fictional video game Stay Alive does look like it could have been a fun co-op survival horror game. I wish we could have seen more of the game itself because it does seem fascinating. It makes me wonder why they didn't turn it into a real game. Licensed games were everywhere during this time period. It doesn't matter if you were a cartoon, movie, TV show, sitcom, game show, board game, or even a fast food chain. If you even just existed, you probably had a video game made about you. It was more abnormal not to have a licensed tie-in game. Even But Ugly Martians got a video game. Oddly enough, Stay Alive, the horror movie based on video games, didn't get one. A shame too, because I think a game based on this movie would have at least been interesting. Okay, I don't think it would have been good, but at least it would have been worth looking into. But what else do you got when it comes to video game inspirations? Well, we've got references! Hey kids, teens, young adults, and all those considered to be financially viable to market towards. We heard you like these video games. Well, so do we. We totally understand the medium. Just look at these classic callbacks.
Seriously, man, sick as shit since Fatal Frame.
We met playing on Unreal Tournament online.
Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA.
Hear that? That was the Konami code. An obscure reference only real gamers will know. Okay, but in all seriousness, the Konami code has seriously got to be one of the most overused references in fiction. It's like the Akira bike slide or a JoJo pose, or as I like to call them, baby's first anime reference. Look man, I don't mind references, but could you at least find some new material? If everyone is referencing the same thing, the same way, then it feels like the writers are trying to fit into a certain crowd rather than making a fun callback. It's like, Luke, I am your father, or Michael Jackson's Thriller at this point. Okay, but your reference is in another castle. Shut the fuck up! It was kind of a missed opportunity, honestly. There's so much about video games that could work for a horror scenario. What about models clipping through walls, unnaturally perfectly looped movements, physics tossing items around? But there really wasn't much here. It feels more like they're just using video games as a gateway to this in-universe urban legend. Well, the plot isn't that interesting, but what about the characters? They're probably even worse than the story. While the story's worst offense is playing it by the books, and sometimes not making any sense, the characters are not only one note, but they're also just not likable. Hutch is just a generic protagonist who must find the answers, Swink who's the anxious nerd, and then there's Abigail who... well, actually, I don't know what she does. She just kinda tags along with Hutch throughout the entire film and rarely does anything on her own. She's just... girl character. And yet you're supposed to see her as not only the second main character, but also the love interest. The goth girl October has way more going for her, and yet she gets killed anyway. She's the only character I felt bad for when she died. Not because I thought she was interesting, but because the film makes it seem like she's the second protagonist. Like I said, Abigail rarely does anything impactful in the film. I often forgot she was even a part of the movie at times. Yet, of course, the pretty blonde girl gets all the glory as the alt girl gets the short end of the stick like fucking always, right? Finally, there's October's brother, Finn, the worst character in the film. His entire personality is nothing but sex, weed, and being an asshole. I don't mind raunchy characters who are perverts or mean characters, but if they're an asshole for no reason, then I don't like it. No sir. After Miller's death, Finn completely undermines it and argues with everyone just so he can keep playing Stay Alive. When he dies halfway through the movie, he's one of the few characters that gets this emotional scene where October sobs over his body and sad piano music plays. Oh no, the horrible person made a horrible demise. Oh, the world's just so darn rotten. Speaking of sex, get your mind out of the gutter, you dirty bastards. Coil that hose up and put it back in the shed. The film is trying really hard to come off as edgy. Just look at the back of the box. Violence, gore, sex/nudity, profanity, drug use. Normally I'd be all for this because I'm an edgelord dickhead who craves violence and draws dummy thick alt women. But here it feels like that they're just trying to come off as edgy rather than actually be edgy. Many would argue that there needs to be a reason for a lot of edgy content to justify it, and besides being a horror slasher, there really is no need. But I don't think there needs to be a reason, and as long as it's fun, then be as edgy as you want. Turn that dial up to 11 with guns a-blazing! Except it's not. They turn it to like a 2, maybe a 3 at best. Nearly all the deaths are either too tame or too short, some even both. The only one death I was impressed by was this cop who just shows up to die. If essentially a background character gets a better, more memorable death scene than any of the main cast, that's a problem. Well, that's Stay Alive for you. It's very run-of-the-mill, and that's disappointing considering that this is Disney's first and only slasher they technically produced. It could have been the start of something great. Instead we get something that's just forgettable. Maybe today, with how people know more about video games and the industry, we could have something that takes more advantage of the medium. Or not, considering that apparently, in universe, Stay Alive was made by one guy in his house, and he just sold a finished project to a publisher. You're telling me that one guy, during the mid-2000s when indie dev wasn't as easily accessible, and the most we either had were Flash games on Newgrounds, Mario World ROM hacks, Half-Life mods, and Alien Hominid, made an entire 3D co-op horror survival game? But what does this have to do with today? Because during the 2020s we had the exact same thing happen with Space Jam 2! Yeah, remember how LeBron James' son made an entire 3D basketball game all by himself on a laptop? At least that's more believable than Stay Alive, considering that indie is way more accessible, with open source engines like Godot, and dozens if not hundreds of video tutorials and text guides online, but still noticeably far-fetched. Congratulations, Stay Alive! You made me give Space Jam 2 credit. That's, an accomplishment, I suppose.